Good afternoon, everyone. I am Lisa Lord, and thank you for joining for this update and media briefing, which will focus on COVID-19 and post-Hurricane Elsa efforts. We will be addressed by Prime Minister, the Honorable Mia Amor-Motley, and the Health and Wellness Minister, Lieutenant Colonel the Honorable Jeffrey Bostic. The Attorney General and the Minister of Legal Affairs, the Honorable Dale Marshall, will also be available to answer any questions. We will go first to Minister Bostic.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Good afternoon, all. I'm happy today to present you with an update in relation to the situation with the management of COVID in Barbados. And I would like to start really by going backwards. So that you would recall that on the 12th of July, I would have indicated to the country that we had a challenge. That challenge being the fact that we had 40 positive cases from 908 tests that were completed by the Best Dos Santos laboratory. Prior to that, and I think for 2 press conferences, I would have indicated that the numbers were increasing a bit and that I was not too much bothered by those numbers because we know we are in a COVID environment, so cases will come. However, I indicated then that we had some concerns at the Ministry of Health and Wellness in what we were seeing in relation to the cases. One, the fact that we were seeing some symptomatic cases, and secondly, that we were seeing cases springing up in various parts of the country. And some of these cases we were not able at that time to identify a link case, and that was obviously cause for concern. So that having given the news of the 40 cases, then we determined a course of action that we would have taken in order to contain the spread of the virus. But during the week preceding the announcement of the 40 cases, just for your information, we would have had about 54 cases out of 6,220 tests that would have been completed. And as I said, that is what we were analyzing to reach the point where we made certain determinations. So that after the 12th of July, those first 40 cases, it was expected and anticipated that there will be additional cases because you're not going to go from 40 down to 0. And so through the aggressive contact tracing that we have been able to initiate and the actions of all persons who are involved in this fight, we were able then to see 7,306 persons being tested, 7,306. This is for the week after the 40 cases. And that yielded a number of 82 cases at the time. So that we've been monitoring the situation. We've taken certain decisions that would have allowed us to be able to contain the spread of the virus. And I'm happy to report today that we are not out of the woods, and I always have to caution you by saying that. But the fact is that our positivity rate, in spite of whatever it is that we are facing, remains low and below 2%. In fact, today's rate is about 1.15% positivity rate. And this is for the last 7 days. The last 7 days. And to give you a comparison with the cumulative incidents, remember we would have established a threshold of 25 cases per 100,000 population. And at one stage we were way above that, and that is why we had to take initiatives at that time. And then we were gradually brought it right down below 25, and at one stage I believe we were somewhere around 15 or 16. Obviously the recent increase in the number of cases would have caused that to increase as well. And I'm happy to report that if you look, for example, at the 14-day period from the 9th of July to the 22nd of July, which would have encompassed part of the period since the 40 cases, the cumulative incidence for that 40-day period rose to 70 cases per 100,000. 70 cases per 100,000. Interestingly enough, the 7-day period, 16th to the 22nd of July, we saw 31 cases per 100,000. 31 cases per 100,000. So the figures actually decline, although we are not where we want to be. So moving on to today's results. We did about 1,675 tests between last night and this morning because we had a large number of persons coming into the country and a large number of persons who had to be tested as a result of contact tracing. Of those figures, we yielded 11 positive cases, 6 males and 5 females. 11 positives, 6 males, 5 females, from 1,675 tests that were completed. And I repeated that because I hope that this will end the social media information that has been circulated suggesting that there was no testing or testing was discontinued at the Grantley Adams International Airport yesterday. That is obviously not true. What I will report here is that as a result of our testing and contact tracing, we've picked up 4 cases at the Grantley Adams International Airport, 4 cases of staff members, some from the Ministry of Health and Wellness team doing the swabbing, and a couple from a private entity that is responsible for meeting and greeting visitors as they arrive. And because of those 4 cases and following our protocols, we then made a decision yesterday, and yes, it was a bit of helter-skelter because we had to put things in place. So we've had to quarantine a number of the persons from the team at the airport, and we made some adjustments during the day by transferring the team at the gymnasium that normally would work the gymnasium to the airport and bringing in some additional persons to be able to maintain the services at the gymnasium. Remembering, of course, that at the gymnasium, that service is predominantly for outbound passengers. And so we took that decision. Naturally, we would have had a bit of a difficulty at first, but we were able to overcome those difficulties in making the transition. And testing continued at the Grantley Adams International Airport yesterday, and will continue today, and is continuing as we speak. And that is really the situation in relation to the airport. I would also like to inform you that as a result of the 1,675 test results that we have back now, that all members of the cricket teams, West Indies and Australia, as well as all of the support staff and the media staff, those who were in the bubble, all of those first test results came back negative. All first test results came back negative. We are also following another situation because we've been fighting this battle on multiple fronts over the last 24 to 36 hours. And we have a developing situation involving a number of Barbadians who would have gone abroad to participate in an event and have returned. And there are 1 or 2 issues relating to that we are following and continuing to follow. We will continue to follow over the next couple of days. And I will be able to speak to that when we have details, but we are trying to be ahead of the game where that is concerned, and that also has been occupying the time of the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Over the last several days, especially resulting from the contact tracing, which was necessary coming out of the 40 cases on the 12th, we would have had over 400 persons in quarantine. Over 400 persons in quarantine at quarantine hotels that we consider to be primary contacts from positive cases. And that was done as part of the ongoing process of isolating primary contacts and families if necessary, so that we could try and contain the spread of the virus. And this is something that is working quite well for us. And as Minister of Health and Wellness, I really have to thank the Honorable Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, for making the resources available to my ministry so that we could do this, and it is not cheap. But we do it because it has to be done, in our view, to be able to, 1, contain the spread of the virus, and secondly, to be able to facilitate economic activity, because that is vital to the country's well-being. And most of those persons obviously would have been either sent to isolation if they tested positive out of quarantine, or they would have exited quarantine by the relevant negative tests, one in the beginning and one 5 days or so afterwards. And so quite a few of those persons have returned to their homes. Another interesting point I would like to raise is the fact that in our isolation facilities, none of the persons in primary and secondary isolation are vaccinated. And that is an important point. None of the persons in primary or secondary isolation are vaccinated. And regrettably, a significant number of those persons, well, significant in recent times, I'm speaking like perhaps 14, 15, 16 persons, had to be oxygenated. They're either on CPAP machines or receiving some form of oxygen because of their symptomatic conditions. And I would take this opportunity once again to ask Barbadians who have not taken a vaccine at this point in time to do so, because it is important that you do so. So that is the report that I would like to make at this point in time. We are continuing to do what we have to do, and I couldn't leave this podium or this mic without saying a serious thank you to those who are on the ground doing contact tracing, because I know it has been difficult given the numbers that we have been dealing with. And also to thank those working the lab for the outstanding effort in getting all of these test results done in the time that they've been able to do so, and to thank all those at the airport, both Ministry of Health and other agencies, all the staff who have been working assiduously to keep this country safe. I want to thank you sincerely on behalf of the government of Barbados for a job very well done. And with those opening remarks, I hand over to you now, Lisa, and I will be available to take questions at the end. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Minister Bostic. We now go to the Prime Minister.
Much, Lisa. And Minister Bostic, let me start where you ended. And I want to start by continuing to thank Barbadians, and in particular those within the health sector and the other frontline workers at the airport and the seaport and elsewhere, for continuing, for the most part, to work with us to ensure that even though COVID exists on this earth, that we will continue to try to constrain and restrict its passage as much as possible in this land of ours. It's not an easy task, and I think you heard Minister Bostic make the point that we have literally seen some level of improvement. But as long as we have people in primary and secondary isolation at Harrison's Point, my friends, we are still very much in the middle of the battle. And I want to use my voice this afternoon, therefore, to tell you that now is the time, yet again, for us to make sure each and every day that we do the simple things that will protect us, the simple things that will protect your family at home, your children, your elderly parents, your elderly relations, your community. And it's just too simple. I think the drill is there. Anything that we do over and over and over should become habit. And to that extent, therefore, wearing the mask is still important. Don't mind what you hear from others overseas. Wearing the mask is not only essential, but it is important to help you contain the spread, along with each and every other Barbadian doing the same thing. Similarly, as a result of the information given to us by the Ministry of Health, we continue to be concerned, but it is not a situation, as I indicated 2 days ago, that requires any further lockdown. We will hold the curfew for another 2 weeks, and the Attorney General has already drafted the directive for me. There are one or two changes in it. Those involved in wrestling and boxing and martial arts will be permitted to do non-contact training and non-contact shadow boxing, or whatever it is they call themselves. They do, but no contact sports, no contact within those three sports. Other than that, the only other change in the directive is going to be a requirement that any person presenting fraudulent documents to any official of the government of Barbados, whether it be a fraudulent PCR test or whether it be a fraudulent vaccine certificate will be subject to penalties within the criminal justice system. And the Attorney General will make those available. I believe that it will be subject to a $100,000 fine as well as a maximum of 2 years in prison. Those will be done initially in the directive to cover us immediately, but there will be separate legislation brought as well for the avoidance of doubt, even though the legislation gives the directive the power of law. I say so because the Minister of Health has already spoken about this, and we take this very, very, very seriously. And to that extent, we ask persons to note that if you feel that you've gotten past the airport or the seaport with a fraudulent certificate and you feel it's over, don't feel it's over, because there's something called post-entry audit, and we will do post-entry audits. And if we find that you have given us a test result that the person or the lab from which it has come cannot verify and cannot validate that you received a test or you received a vaccination, then, my friends, it will be passed over to the right authorities for further action. I say this conscious that I've heard some people say, oh, the people who were doing it were only just trying to get it done because they were late for the plane. Well, it will be the most costly delayed arrival at the airport that you will ever have in life. So I would like to humbly suggest that if that happens to you, pay the change fee and come another day and get the right tests, because we are not taking chances with people, and we will do the post-entry audits, and that is why the Attorney General is here to assure us, and we will work with the relevant governments, whether it is the United States of America government or the Canadian or the British or whoever we have to work with, to ensure that we can have access. Under our laws, we have treaty arrangements for mutual legal assistance with countries with whom we have relations, and we will use them. So I hope that everyone gets the message that it is not even cute to be presenting either false test results or false vaccine certificates. With respect to the general directive, as I said, we will keep the curfew for another 2 weeks. I've told you always that we will apply brakes and accelerator as required, but what we won't do is overreact. And in our view, at this stage, we have enough capacity still to continue as we are doing. If we ever reach a stage where we have to shut down the country, we will do it. But there is no such case, no basis for it. We have more than enough therapeutics. We have more than enough tests. We have more than enough medical personnel and capacity. And we will hopefully be in a position, as I said, to continue to see the decline in the positivity rate that the Minister has indicated to you. For that to happen, who do we need? All of you, all of us. We have to work together. And regrettably, as I move around Barbados, I see some people still not being as careful as they could otherwise be. And I ask us, please, I know it is difficult. I know it is hard. And believe you me, even for wearing this, sometimes I got to beg for excuse and walk away from people and pull it down, because I feel, I get it. But guess what? Beg for the excuse and walk away, because that is what is going to save lives and save people, especially with the last thing that the Minister told us just now. Of all of the 46 persons in primary and secondary care at Harrison's Point, not one of them is vaccinated. Not one. And therefore, my friends, I repeat the call for all Barbadians to be vaccinated. There is so much fake news out there, and my heart hurts me, because a lot of the fake news is intended to be able to cause strife. And the only people who are being hurt, regrettably, are the people who are listening to it. All of us have said over and over, know what it is to take vaccinations from children. We couldn't go to school without them. You can't travel without them. There are even vaccine clauses in the collective agreement between the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association and the Barbados Workers Union. And I invite the members of the media to go and get a copy of that collective agreement and look at it. I think it relates to hepatitis. But the bigger issue that we have to ask, and I accept, as does the Attorney General, that not everybody is familiar with the law. And the reality is that it is not only that an employer has an obligation to keep a safe place at work, and we will discuss that next week with the social partnership, But there are also implications because, regrettably, persons who are responsible for hurting somebody else by deliberately or recklessly transmitting the virus to them, knowing full well that they're working in first and close quarters, will be putting themselves at risk, not only medically, but obviously also legally. And I really, really hope that a strong discussion in the social partnership next week will begin to allow us to see the changes that we need to see in terms of the uptake. We've done well, don't get me wrong, we've done reasonably well compared to most others in the hemisphere, but we are not yet where we need to be. And as I said, 1/3 of the adult population is not sufficient. We hope that we will continue to receive more vaccines. It is still like pulling teeth. Believe you me, it is the wild, wild west, as I've said over and over. But we have every confidence that we should pick up some more in August again. And on top of what we have, we should be able to significantly ramp up. And it is against that background that the discussions with the social partnership have now for us to settle what will be our policy with respect to work and with respect to access at medical and health facilities and any other areas in which there is close quarter working between persons and the beneficiary of the service being offered. Without prejudice to that, I also want today to recognize that in the midst of COVID, we had the freak storm and Elsa. And to that extent, I'm using this opportunity to also begin to address some of the issues. Minister Duguid will be available for a more comprehensive review if necessary tomorrow. But thus far, I'd like to speak generally to the completed and to the assessments that we have done since Hurricane Elsa and, of course, the freak storm before. Hurricane Elsa led to 2,177 house reports. There were just about 3,000 incidents from the DEM overall, but the major concerns related to houses, house damage, and house repairs. Of the 2,177, 110 were in St. Lucie, 82 St. Peter, 132 St. Andrew, 53 St. Joseph, 95 St. James, 117 in St. John, 130 in St. Thomas, 284 in St. George, 475 in St. Michael, 411 in Christchurch, 288 in St. Philip. I think we all know that the majority of the damage took place in St. Michael, then Christchurch, then St. Philip and St. George, more or less being equal with being the major parishes within which serious damage occurred. Of the 2,177 cases that I've just referred to, we've completed assessments of 1,391, and those assessment teams are constituted with engineers, project managers, quantity surveyors, people who are versed in this task. To that extent, that 1,391 completed assessments represents 64% of the total cases having been assessed. Of those 1,391, 352 houses will have to be complete new builds from scratch. They cannot be repaired. 968 houses will be repaired, and basically anything above 60% repairs requires a new house. Materials requested, 18 people requested materials rather than having their house rebuilt or repaired. And then there are 53 others that have multiple different configurations that have to be dealt with on an individual basis. So that you can see that a significant amount of work has been done. The government and cabinet is very clear. Those persons who are below the poverty line, we will continue to support, as has been the policy of the government of Barbados. Those persons who are above the poverty line then will enter into arrangements with us, whether it is rent to own or if they can get their own mortgage or however which way, but those discussions will be kept separately. It is against that background, therefore, that we expect a significant amount of work to be done. We've actually seen them start, and in relation to the contracts that have been assigned, with respect to the persons. There are 19 new bills that are already in progress, and there are also, with respect to contracts being issued, 121 of the new bills have been assigned by UDC, and 160 have been assigned thus far by RDC. And we expect separately that because we are only at 64%, that we are going to see more new bills required beyond the 352. The government has agreed that we will purchase 150 houses to be used by new technology that should be prefabricated technology without prejudice to the ones that we are signing here. And we're doing that because we recognize that we have to use multiple different routes to be able to ensure that as many of these houses can be rebuilt or repaired between now and the end of the year. The Ministry of People Empowerment and Elderly Affairs is responsible for the interim accommodation, and they have assigned locations for 188 persons who are requiring temporary accommodation from us because their houses have been completely destroyed. I believe we have some footage as to the different areas where repairs have started, and I'm not sure whether we are in a position, please, to share the footage with the members of the public. We've started repairs in Lamings in St. Joseph, in Hillswick Village in St. Joseph, in Parks Road in St. Joseph, in Green Hill in St. Michael, in Wavell Avenue in Black Rock, in Goodland in St. Michael, in Bridge Gap in St. Michael, in Broomfield in St. Lucie, in Hope Road in St. Lucie, in Orange Hill Development in St. James, in Well Road in St. Lucie. And as I said, that's just the footage we got a few days ago, but the truth is, with every day, there are new contracts being started, and we are going forward ensuring that after the appropriate officials have made the requisite investigations, that we are in a position to assign as required the contracts to be able to recover from Hurricane Elsa. We are very much still in discussions with CRIF, and it seems as though their model does not believe that Barbados had significant damage. We have told them that we find it impossible to believe that they cannot see the damage that has happened, and in reality, regrettably, because CRIF deals with a parametric trigger for insurance, they pay out money not on the basis of actual damage, but unfortunately on the basis of a model. But such is life, and we shall shoulder on and press on, recognizing that as long as Barbadians are affected, we have a responsibility to provide the appropriate housing. Fortunately, I can say Minister Duguid has been very much on the ball with respect to being able to ensure that government's housing program meets those, one, earning under $2,000 a month, two, earning between $2,000 to $4,000, and three, between $4,000 to $8,000. And we are satisfied that there is tremendous demand. The use of the photovoltaic panels for the overall housing program will help to minimize the risk that Barbadians will face, especially those who are working at the bottom end and who might otherwise not have been able to afford some of the very high prices out there to access housing in this country, with land previously selling as high as $25 a square foot and houses going at concomitantly higher prices than we would otherwise be able to see them afford as a nurse, as a teacher, as a police officer. In addition to that, as I said, those earning under $2,000 a month or those whose income is not steady, the photovoltaic panels on the roofs will help ease the pressure and make them better risk, both in terms of rental and mortgages at the lower income and the lower middle income and the middle income as we go forward. So my friends, that is a brief update for today. As we go forward, we will be able to address many of these issues. We'll stop at this point unless, AG, is there anything you want to add, or are we good? So we can take questions from here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister. And at this time, I'll just ask members of the media to introduce themselves and the media house they represent before posing their questions.
Hi, good
Good. Go ahead, Carl. Go
afternoon.
ahead.
Somebody want to go first? That's no problem.
Go ahead, buddy.
Okay, all right. Colville Munzi from Nation News. One question for Minister Bostic. I would have posed this question earlier for the Chief Medical Officer, and he wasn't, maybe it was early days still in this spike. But the question I have for you, sir, are we in a third wave?
Based on the evidence we have before us, I do not have any reason to believe that we are in a third wave. And whatever we are in, I can tell you that it is trending downwards and that we are very much on top of the situation in relation to our ability to contain the spread. And that's all I can say at this point in time. But there's no evidence to suggest that we are in a situation that we were in back in January, for example. Absolutely not. But we do have some cases, and as long as we have cases, then we have to manage those cases.
If I may also add to that, please, Colville. I don't want us to get caught up in the jargon of the international media. And the international media has to find ways of encapsulating concepts and selling them. What we have is a reality that as long as the world continues to see vaccine nationalism and vaccine apartheid, COVID is going to be with us for a while. And therefore, whether you have 10 cases today or 5 cases or 20 or 40, you are more or less seeing probably what is your base scenario. Okay? But we would like, obviously, to keep that to as low as possible and preferably single digit, if no digits, but single digits and certainly under 20 a day. That is our reality. I don't know and will not get caught up in whether it's a wave or not, but suffice it to say that this is our new reality, and I need Barbadians to accept that a wave suggests that you can drop your guard and then you pick it back up again when the wave is coming. Well, there's no dropping of the guard. So I want to get away from the language of wave, because this is with us. And therefore, this is just how we have to do things differently until such time as the world is able to eradicate COVID-19 from the global landscape. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Randy Bennett from Barbados today. One question for the Prime Minister. You spoke about some stiff penalties that will be introduced to persons who are caught presenting fraudulent documentation. Is there a situation where health authorities have received a large number of these of persons presented with these fraudulent documents that has made government decide to take this stance?
Enough for us to be concerned, yes. And why? It only takes one. It only takes one person to move in the right places where there is a lot of people to cause problems. And we trust people, and you're asking us to trust people to do things normally on the basis of vaccinations or on the basis of tests. If you pretend to be somebody that you're not, and you cause an elderly person to die, it tells me that you are reckless as to the consequences of your actions. The profession that I came from before coming into public life has a definition for it and a case for it called is the Queen versus Cunningham Dale. You understand? And it has a very, very clear set of things that a person can be guilty of basic criminal acts, not only on the basis of intention, but on the basis of being reckless as to the consequences of their actions. And this is as old as the common law is, which is hundreds and hundreds of years.
Next question.
Minister, Wendy Burke from CBC. You mentioned that the Attorney General is currently working on that legislation with regard to the documents. At this stage, can you expand for us any more as to whether it is just the test and the vaccination card, or how broad and all-encompassing can we expect this legislation to be?
Be very clear, Wendy. I said that we have it in the directive that I'm about to sign. The draft directive that has been placed before us for signature does have it. That gives it the force of law. For the avoidance of doubt, we will also include it in immigration or health legislation to ensure that people do not get into the habit even beyond these directives, because remember, the directives have limited life, but COVID may last much longer and other people may try to present fraudulent documents for other reasons. And all we are saying simply is that we are not prepared to take the chance, and anybody who thinks that they're going to take a chance with a false certificate because they're late for a flight better think again, because the consequences are simply too grave for us to carry. And a lot of what we've done as a nation has been very different from other countries. Most countries do not quarantine people who are primary contacts to people who have tested positive. We do. Most countries do not take a lot of the decisions that we take with respect. When you come in with vaccines, they don't test you again. Vaccinations, they don't test you again. We have gone and taken a few more measures. Some people think that it may be too many. We think that is what is necessary to keep us as safe as possible. And we do so because 166 square miles is a dot. You understand? And we can't afford for the dot to get full up fast with any problems. So we make the balance and we agree that we are going to try to protect of us. Can you imagine if we weren't quarantining primary contacts, where we would be today? That's really where the essence of this discussion is. And that's why the government has worked as assiduously. Are we at 100,000 yet with vaccinations? I know we were very, very close. We were at 99,000 almost. And I expect us to reach the 100,000 mark in terms of single doses. And of course, the double dosage one is at 78,000, I believe. So we spend this money in order to keep all of us safe. And to have one or two people come in and have the potential to turn that on its head. And some of the people who are getting some of these fraudulent certificates are Barbadians. That's how we know about it, okay? And the bottom line is that it was not definitively a problem before. It is one that we are watching now, and the consequences of them getting through and causing problems are disproportionate to what we're doing, and therefore why we're taking the action. Okay? Thank you.
Minister, earlier on in your statement, and I want to be very clear because I don't want to misquote you at all. You seem to have been suggesting that employers have some legal standing or precedent by which they can how should I put this? They can insist that their employees be vaccinated within the interest of keeping that safe work environment. Is that the road that you are heading down? I just want to be sure.
I think instinctively that is not what I said, because you already prefaced the comments by saying that you got it wrong. How you got it wrong was by saying that employers have a duty to insist on vaccinations. That's not what I said. I said employers have a duty to ensure that there is a safe place of work. That safe place of work can come either as a result of a person being vaccinated or as a result of a person being negative. And therefore, regular testing may well be an alternative to vaccinations. The question is, who will carry the cost of the regular testing, largely because vaccinations are free, and initially tests are free other than for those who are traveling overseas. The Cabinet has already agreed that people who are traveling overseas, whether local or foreign, should start paying for their tests now. And similarly, we may well have to consider it with respect to people who are requiring regular tests because they don't want a free vaccination. But these are subjects that have to be discussed, as we do in Barbados, at the social partnership. and I expect that conversation to start. I don't expect it to finish necessarily in one session, but I expect us to at least start the conversation next week and see where we can get consensus. If we cannot get consensus, as I've said over and over, the government will govern. But we want always to see where we can move with consensus, because that is when this country is strongest. Thank you.
Thanks for clearing out that Prime Minister. Also,
Thank you.
switching gears quickly, in terms of I asked this question again earlier. By the time, I think it was too early to say. Hopefully, the time is much better now. The bill that Elsa has left us with, can you give me some indication of that, please?
No, but I just showed you, Colville, that we only at 64% of the assessments. So to set a bill for you would be to give you a headline that would then cause you and the others to hold me to something that is not based on fact, but based on nothing but speculation. And I've been in town, as Chalky would say, a little too long for that. Thank you. Nice one. Nice one.
Oh, go ahead, Marcia.
Oh, hey, good afternoon. Marcia Giddens, Barbados Advocate. My question is directed to Minister Bostic. Are there any plans to offer incentive to people to get a vaccine, or is it even being considered?
The Minister of Health and Wellness, when it comes to things like incentives or anything that would require finance, I will be batting out of my wicket.
Called me to the wicket, so I'm not answering. Unless you want to call me, ma'am.
Sure, go right ahead, Minister.
Thank you. Look, all of this will be discussed at the social partnership next week, in all honesty. As I said, Barbados is far better than most countries, but we have some distance to travel. And yes, there is vaccine hesitancy, although I must tell you that there are larger and larger numbers of people who initially said no when I discussed it with them 2 months ago, who are now saying, when can we get, and are we likely to get Pfizer as well? Are we likely to get this one as well? And they're asking all kinds of questions. And they're asking also for their children, I must add, teenagers in particular. So I'm confident that the social partnership will come to a resolution. Like most things in life, and those who are responsible for families know this well, that a carrot and stick approach always works well. And I don't see any different reason why it would not work well in this situation. But I won't prejudge the issue. Thank you.
Wendy?
I hope that helps you.
It does.
Wendy, I believe you can proceed.
Yes, Lisa. When this question is for the Prime Minister. Earlier, when she spoke to the housing that is to be done and some of the contracts starting to be awarded, etc., she spoke to some new building technologies, and I'm interested to hear about them, especially with the new Town Planning Act that's to come into play, how some of these new houses will look to provide some more hurricane resilience in terms of our construction methodologies and so on now.
To the best of my knowledge, the new fabrication technology will be both capable of withstanding hurricanes, I think, up to a category 3, but I speak subject to correction, as well as being eco-friendly and reducing the carbon footprint by each house by about 7.5 tons, so that and to allow for coolness within the house and ventilation, because as you know, half the reason why people come out of houses a lot is if it's hot, and therefore they go on the block and they go elsewhere, and that's when other things start to think. So believe you me, that technology is basically lightweight steel, gauge frame as I understand it, but it is also the materials for which the house will be clad in that are also specially designed to be able to do what has to be done in terms of keeping it cool and using materials that are eco-friendly. Minister Duguid at the right time will show a presentation of them, but suffice it to say that it was also one of the ones that came in for our low-income housing, And all we've done is to identify it, to be able to try 150 houses immediately before we go to the larger numbers, which we expect to go to anyhow. When we did that project at Lancaster earlier this year, the Hope Direct, if you recall, that site only accommodates, I think, just about 200 houses, and we had over 12,000 applications. Now, if ever there was a reflection of a dire demand, that is it. And we recognize that the cost of housing for too long in this country was just simply out of the reach of too many. And to that extent, what the government has spent a lot of time working on is how to reduce the cost of land. We've done that by putting planning gains on a lot of the major town planning applications, which has meant that the government has had and received quite a bit of acreage, I think just under 200 acres AG, free of cost, which means that we will not pass that on to anybody because it's free of cost and it's being done for the public purpose. We've also been able to contain and hold at a level the cost of the development of services, because the cost of services also affects the cost of land and housing. We're also working to be able to ensure that the photovoltaic panels provide a source of revenue, which then reduces what the person has to pay. And in the case of Hope Direct, what it did was effectively take out the cost of the land, which is why the Hope Direct projects are more affordable. And what Minister Duguid will speak to you about is the Hope Advance, which is the low income for persons under $2,000. And that's where we're hoping to use the technology. Let's be real. We're going to need technology in order to keep costs down for the very, very low income, because traditional building practices obviously tend to be more expensive because of not having the economies of scale. But we accept that in Barbados we cannot go fully one way or fully the other way, and that it will be a mix of all types of construction that will admit, therefore, of us being able to bring about that silent revolution in housing which the government wants to preside over. Thank you.
A question for the minister. I know that there's a curfew in place, but there have been some parties which have been advertised as brunch parties, which usually take place in the morning period, which would be within the curfew. Is the Ministry of Health, has it given permission for these parties to be held during these curfews?
AG, you want to answer this, because it's very clear, the directives are very clear.
Very much, Prime Minister. I would almost think that's a trick question. The directive clearly says that parties are not allowed, and therefore for the minister or for anybody to give a permission for a party of any kind would run obviously and immediately afoul of the clear terms of the directive. So if anybody is having a party, whether it's morning, noon or night, that party is an illegal event and is in breach of the protocols. People who are attending, people who are hosting, people who are in any way involved in such an event could find themselves before the law courts and liable to a $50,000 fine or up to a year in prison.
Party, because what we recognize is that people outside a shop, that there even has to be numbers there, and the AG, I think you've limited that to 40
for an outdoor, yes,
for an outdoor type event. But that's not a party. Anything that will then have music and people dancing, etc., out of order, out of line, out of bounds. Does that help, Randy?
Thanks a lot.
We'll send you to the requisite section of the directive. Okay, I'll send it for you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Are there any more questions?
Yes, I just have two quick questions for Minister Bostic. Minister, first of all, could you tell me how many clusters are we dealing with at this current juncture? And also, in relation to the airport staff, could you tell me how they are being accommodated, those being tested or in quarantine at the moment?
I'll start with the airport staff first. The staff are being treated in the same way that all primary contacts are treated. They are in hotel quarantine and they're being tested in accordance with the protocol. So persons would have started to be tested, first test from yesterday. Some will start today, obviously, because of the additional case that we had today. And then they will be tested on day 5 before they are released from quarantine, but they are placed in hotel quarantine. And the first question was? The clusters, yeah. There are about 10 clusters that we are following, that we've been following. A lot of the clusters at the moment are dormant, to be honest with you. For example, I would have spoken to a church cluster. There's nothing much that has happened there in recent days, or in terms of the business cluster, nothing much has happened there in recent days. So that is why I have not really given any information in relation to those clusters, because I didn't have anything new or of what I consider to be important to report.
Any further questions?
Yes, Lisa, I have one more. And this is in relation to the Sinopharm vaccines and the uptake of them. What I'm wondering is if this slow pace of people coming forward to get the Sinopharm goes on much longer, can it put those vaccines at risk for the expiration date, closing in on them? And if it seems as though that might be happening, is there any backup plan maybe to donate some of them to any other country which might be in need at this time?
When your imagination is fertile, and when we reach that point, I assure you that we will be able to propagate that fertile imagination. But at this point, we can't. Okay? Thank you.
Prime Minister, if there are no further questions, I'll ask you to close at this time.
I just want to close by once again speaking to Bajans. Our future lies in our hand, and every day it does. We're doing reasonably well. We want to turn the corner. We want to get more people out there working. I just came from the Planning and Priorities Committee meeting, which, by the way, I intend from the next one in the next quarter in October to start to broadcast so that Barbadians can get a better sense of some of the issues that we deal with. That committee is a subcommittee of cabinet that deals with capital projects. We are focused on getting as many capital projects as possible. But the reality is that every time somebody tests positive for COVID, there's a business interruption. And that business interruption then, because of our own protocols to allow for quarantining of primary contacts, has perhaps a greater cost and consequence than it might otherwise do initially, although in the long run, in my view, it saves, because we are making sure that the country does not run rampant, or is not run rampant with COVID all over it. To that extent, I really, really, really want to appeal, and first and foremost, to everyone. Wear your mask, please. Wear your mask and wear it properly. And they say that repetition is not needed. In this, repetition is needed every day. I've asked for there to be even more aggressive public education and reminders than we have seen, because I think we can do better. I've gone into a number of locations across this country, whether it is buying fish, whether it is walking in town, whether it is walking in Speightstown, whether it is in Oistins. I still feel that we can do a little better. And if I got here and didn't tell you that, I would be doing this country a disservice and doing each of you a disservice. Nobody knows where this goes. And even though we're doing well, it requires our active engagement. As it relates to the vaccines, I've always said that we're not going on the front foot aggressively with a public education program until we have another large supply again. Why? Because the worst thing to do is to have somebody ready to take a chance and then you don't have enough to offer them. So to that extent, Wendy, I think that over the next few weeks, especially if we get the order that I expect to get by the middle of August, that we will be in a position to go on the front foot fairly aggressively again with respect to the public education for those who are hesitant or who are more disposed to listen to what is being said on social media, for which there is no validation, particularly on things that really have limited thing. Can we guarantee that there are no side effects? We can't. But equally, we know that if you catch COVID and you have COVID, as we've shown, 100% of the people in primary and secondary isolation today in Barbados are unvaccinated. I do not know what further evidence people need to make the right decision and to ensure that they protect themselves first and foremost and all of the people around them that they love. The government of Barbados is not asking anybody for a payment for a vaccination, and therefore the only thing it is going to cost you is time. And I ask you therefore to reflect on these things and let us move forward, hoping that we can get to the goal of herd immunity before the end of this year, comfortably so that economic development for those who are without jobs, or for those whose businesses are suffering, or for those who just simply can't even get to the hospital because it may be otherwise diverted with COVID-related activity or COVID-related cases, and that they can then, we can start to bring down the backlog that has developed from people who, for whatever reason, were hesitant to go to doctors or the hospital, and whose incidence of chronic NCDs may well be given trouble at this stage. So I look forward to our working together, and stay safe, my brethren and sisters, stay safe. That's all I can say. And with God on our side, we can do anything and move any mountain. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Prime Minister, the Honourable Mia Amor Motley. Let me also thank the Minister of Health and Wellness, Lieutenant Colonel, the Honourable Jeffrey Bostic, the Minister of Legal Affairs, the Attorney General, the Honourable Dale Marshall, members of the media, and you for joining. Good evening.